of a sectional over here on the right, and then on the left I have a copy of the chart legend. So on the back side of your chart you have this legend. So if you ever find a symbol that you don't really know what it is, you can always look at the legend and that might give you an answer. Or you might have to do some Googling. Not everything's necessarily listed on the legend. Online there is some bigger PDFs with some more stuff. Just hitting some high points on the legend. Normally runways are going to look like these two right here. So bigger runways, so above 8,069 feet, then it's going to be illustrated as a thicker and bigger runway. Normally, you're going to see the runways looking like this. Private fields might have an R, or it might say private. Abandoned fields is going to be a circle with an X. If there's ever these four dots, these four lines around it on the north, south, east, and west side, that means there's fuel available. There might still be fuel available even if that's not the case in the days of self-serve fuel. The little star means a rotating beacon. You got different class airspace. So a thick blue line is a Bravo airspace. Thick purple line is a Charlie airspace. Dashed blue is a Delta airspace. You're typically always going to have a ceiling listed there. Class E airspace, if it starts at the surface, it's going to be a solid purple. If it's a faded purple, then we call that magenta. Then it's going to start at 700 feet. We'll talk about some airspace stuff later on. You got a Victor route right there. You got prohibited and warning areas. Maybe some restricted areas, mostly along the coast as well. You'll see that. Then you have alert and military operating areas. We'll talk about those special traffic areas. Another thing to mention is TARSA, so Terminal Radar Service Area. If you ever see a blue line that kind of looks like a gray line that looks like a Victor route, but it's gray, that's going to be a military training route. You got your airport data. So normally your airport's not going to have all this listed. Normally it's just going to have a name. It's going to have an identifier, a control tower if it has it. A lot of times it's a star because it's operational part-time. Then you have a C for CTAF. Then you'll have some weather frequency. You'll have some runway length. Some field elevation, some light information, either lighting non-standard or lighting sunset to sunrise. You'll normally see a star with an L. Then you'll see the longest runway. So this is 72, so 7,200 feet is what that stands for. And then Unicom information. If it's ever not left traffic to a runway, then it'll say right patterns to whatever runways that it is. I've never really seen those three below there, so we'll kind of skip over that. So in a nav box, you'll normally have, this is for like on a VOR, you'll have the name of the VOR, you'll have a frequency, you'll have another frequency that's for military. It'll be a channel for DME, you'll have an identifier, and then you'll have some Morse code information. An RCO is going to look pretty similar there. VORs, so there's just different types of ones. There's VORs, there's Vortex. We kind of treat them as the same deal. They don't really change much for us. You got different obstructions. So taller obstructions are going to be illustrated as taller. So if it's above 1,000 feet tall, then it'll be this bigger one, versus if it's smaller than 1,000 feet, it'll be this smaller one. Sometimes there's lights on them, so if they have high intensity lights, they'll be illustrated like this. Miscellaneous ones, so you got gliders, you got stadiums, you got isogonic lines, you got VFR, you got checkpoints, VFR waypoints, parachutes, areas, power lines, and then we'll kind of look at some random ones here in a second. Okay, so now I'm just gonna point out a bunch of them on the map. So I've just got an online version of the sectional chart. So here's Tuscaloosa. So we're just kind of looking around Tuscaloosa right now, just pointing out some stuff. All right, so here's a power line right here. So this is just the black line with the tower there. Railroad tracks. Here's railroad tracks. It's the black line with the dashes across. So that was not on the legend itself. So roads. Here's a little gray road. So bigger road, the bigger it's going to be illustrated. So this is a smaller road. This is even smaller of a road versus interstates and really large highways. We got that where it's kind of doubled right there. So anytime you have a town, either it's going to be yellow for a congested area. So that's a lot of houses and people nearby. Whereas if it's smaller, you might just have a circle with the town name nearby it. Bodies of water are going to be blue. Thicker bodies of water are going to be illustrated as such. So sometimes if it's just kind of a stream, you might not be able to see. Like up here, it's kind of a stream. Might be able to see that lake or whatever pond, I guess is what you call. Whereas this Warrior River, it's a little bit bigger. You'll definitely be able to see something like that. Looking around for some more checkpoints. Looking for a pipeline now. All right, so here's an underground pipeline. So it's just this dash line, and at some point along the way, it says pipeline. So this lightly dashed black is a pipeline. You got a bunch of different towers. So these towers are going to be, the top one is MSL, and then the bottom one is how tall it physically is. So this tower is, if you're flying over it at 1,200 feet, then you barely pass over it, by 94 feet, whereas it's 703 feet tall. Sometimes it doesn't list how tall it is, and that means it's really short. So bigger ones. So we above northeast of Tuscaloosa, we got some really tall ones. So these towers are 2,000 feet tall each. So they're really big. They have those high intensity lights. And on a good day, you can actually see them from Tuscaloosa. You got this blue line. That's the Victor route that I was talking about. Then you have this gray line. That's going to be a military route. If there's 4 digits, then it's low level. It's below that. I think 1,500 feet, and then high level is above that if it's just 3 digits for the military route. You might occasionally see things like tank listed or lock and dam listed or strip mines listed. You might have a little symbol for strip mines as well. So for flying along, and we want to make sure that we're not going to have a really tall obstacle along our route, kind of the easiest way, instead of just looking left and right of our line the whole entire time, is to look in each quadrant. In each quadrant, there's going to be this number published. So in this quadrant, then the number of 1,200 is listed. So what that means is the highest obstacle is less than 1,200 feet MSL. Generally, it's around 200 feet off of whatever that number is. So I think it's going to be this obstacle that is at 1010 MSL. So you can just look. So if we're flying northeast, let's say we're flying to Birmingham, we want to make sure, we see 2,800. That might be a little bit concerning for flying at 3,000 feet. But we look around and we realize that those tallest obstacles is going to be up in the top left part of that quadrant. So it's not an issue if we're just flying to Birmingham. That should be well off our route. So then you can kind of just meticulously scan left or right of whatever course we draw to make sure that there are no other ones that are equally as tall. So here's that VFR checkpoint that I was kind of talking about. What you'll see those for is whenever they're getting to really close to big airspace, it might just be some visual points that you can look at, see on the ground, and you can know to go ahead and contact whoever's airspace you're flying towards. It's not as big of a deal in the days of GPS, but that used to be the case. All right, so MOAs. So MOAs are military operating areas. It's in this with this purple. So they're not operational all the time. Generally, there's times published for when they might be operational. You can always ask a flight service station frequency if they're quote unquote hot. It's what it's called whenever they are active. They're typically from some altitude to some other altitude, so they have a floor and a ceiling. But that is not always, so they're not always operational. You can always ask flight service station frequency, but we can fly through them and it's not an issue. So right here, this 88, it's going to be, our line to longitude, whereas this 32 is our line of latitude. We don't really ever have situations where I ask you, hey, what's our lat long right now? That's just not something I really do. So now we can kind of talk about different airspace. So Tuscaloosa's airspace is class Delta. So we can tell that because we have this little blue ring around it. So this dashed blue ring around it. And typically class Delta airspace is going to go from the floor to 2,500 feet AGL. So that's why there's this little 2,700 box here, because the field elevation is 170. So 170 rounded up, add 2,500 to it, you get 2,700 feet. So that's class Delta. So dashed blue, it's typically about 4 nautical miles in radius, and then it is going to be 2,500 feet above ground. Oh, so there's going to be a tower. There's going to be a tower at that airport, and there's a tower at Tuscaloosa Airport. So here is a uncontrolled field. So uncontrolled field is going to be this magenta going on, and so this is the uncontrolled field of North Pickens. It's got fuel we can see because of these 4 arrows. It's got a rotating beacon, but there is no tower at this field. So at the surface, it's going to be class Golf airspace. So class Golf airspace is uncontrolled. So it's uncontrolled. There is no ATC in control of it. But since we have this magenta around it, that means that class Echo starts at 700 feet. So class Echo is controlled airspace. So at 700 feet above ground, then class Echo airspace starts right here. But right here, where my mouse is, class Golf airspace starts at the surface and goes up to 1,200 feet, and then class Echo starts. So inside the magenta, it's going to start, class Echo is going to start at 700. Outside the magenta, class Echo is going to generally start at 1,200 feet. And the reason for that is because of instrument approaches. People on IFR flight plans flying into these fields, air traffic control just wants to be able to control to a little bit lower of an altitude to make sure that it's safe. So class Echo starting at 1,200 versus class Echo starting at 700. So around Tuscaloosa, you got this area outside of our class Delta where that class Echo airspace still starts at 700 feet. So that's kind of Golf Echo and Delta. So now we're moving down. We've got Class Charlie Airspace. So this thick purple is Class Charlie Airspace. And we also have this Class Echo transition area right with it as well. So with Class Charlie Airspace, you're going to have two rings generally. So you're going to have an inner ring that goes from the surface to some altitude and some outer rings that go from some altitude to some other altitude. So you want to keep that in mind. So, if you were flying at 2,300 feet right here, you would not be in their airspace. So surface to 4,600 feet MSL. So it's typically from the surface to 4,000 feet above it. So, but out here, it's 2,400 to 4,600. So you just got to keep in mind any of these sectors. So this kind of goes all the way around over 180 degrees, whereas it's 1,900 to 4,600 in this area right here. So that's Class Charlie Airspace from the surface to 4,000 feet above ground, and it's controlled airspace. They're going to have a tower and approach and departure control at those airports, and so you've got to make sure that you contact them. So for Class Delta Airspace, all we need to do is have radio communications prior to enter their airspace. So before we are 4 nautical miles away from there, we've got to talk to them so that they at least say our call sign. For Class Charlie Airspace, we've got to have two-way radio communication prior to entering the airspace, but also we've got to have a transponder with Mode C. So what Mode C is just altitude reporting, and our planes have Mode C transponders. So we just got to make sure that we actually have those, though. So we've got to talk to them, and it's a little bit more important that we do earlier on because they might be a little bit busier. All right, so I've kind of scooted over to Atlanta's airspace right now. So Atlanta's a really, really busy airspace. So Atlanta airspace is Class Bravo airspace. So Class Bravo airspace is going to be super busy. There's only so many airports that classify as Class Bravo airspace in the United States. So Class Bravo airspace are going to be these thick blue areas. There's going to be a whole lot more areas where there's outer and inner rings. So it's kind of like an upside down wedding cake, and Atlanta's airspace is very complicated because it's such a big airport. So you got a lot of congested areas up here to the north of the city, and you got a lot of airports surrounding it. So anytime you're operating near Class Bravo airspace, you're going to need a transponder with Mode C, typically within 30 nautical miles. It's with this purple ring where it says 30 nautical miles, Mode C. So you're going to have that turned on, even if you're not inside their airspace. So there's gonna be a whole lot more sections that you got to be careful if you're trying to skirt that airspace. But right here, it's from 5,000 to 12,500. Typically, it's from the surface up to I think 10,000 feet, but maybe that's a little bit wrong because this is 12.5, and that makes sense. So it's going to be kind of 30 miles in diameter. In radius. And then it's going to be from the surface, up to like 12,500 or 10,000 feet, something like that. It's going to be really high, going to be really, really busy. So it's very important that you talk to them prior to entering their airspace. So for this one, we need to have two-way radio communication, but also permission to enter their airspace. So that's a little bit different than Class Charlie and Delta in that we've got to get permission. They've got to say cleared to enter Class Bravo airspace to our call sign. You've also got to have a transponder with Mode C for Class Bravo airspace as well. Down here near Montgomery, we kind of have a special thing. We have what's called a TARSA. So this gray ring going around, it's called a TARSA. So it's a terminal radar service area. So it's going to be around a Class Delta airspace, but that's busy enough that they decided to throw a TARSA around it so that there can be a little bit of radar control. So you do not have to comply with the TARSA. You don't have to talk to them just because you're in the TARSA. You'd have to talk to them if you're landing in a Class, Delta airspace. But for the TARSA, it's just optional that you talk to them. But it's always advised that you talk to them so that they know that you are there. So it's just going to be kind of similar to Class Charlie airspace, and then it's not that big. So 2,000 to 6,000 feet is what that TARSA is going to go, and it's just because of this Maxwell Air Force Base is probably the reason why there's that TARSA around there. So earlier, whenever I was talking about alert and warning areas, that there are a lot of times at the coast. So here's that warning area in the blue. You got some alert areas, and this purple is probably what these are, unless there's MOAs. You've also got some restricted areas in here. So anytime you're flying in airspace like this, you want to make sure that you're complying with any rules that are published for that airspace so that you're not breaking any rules. Up to the west of Birmingham, there's some interesting stuff I can point out. So there's a restricted area right here in this blue, and then there's also a national security area in this dashed purple. So the reason for this, I think, is because Anderson Radio used to, maybe still does, have chemical warfare agents, so they just don't want you to fly over it. So you can always just read on the national security areas for what they might be for. So avoid flights at or below 5,000 feet in this area. So as long as you're above it, that's not a problem. You'd have to read up on what this restrictions are for this restricted areas, and on the VFR chart, it does talk about those. So anytime you're unsure of a symbol, always just remember you can always look at the legend. If you have any questions on any symbols that you find while you're looking yourself and you don't know what they are and you can't figure it out yourself, you can just ask me and I can help you out with that.